Like most people, you certainly have ideas of what you want to do with your life. You may have them when you're young, when you're a little older, when you're in middle age, even when you're very old. But the question occurs, do you execute on those ideas or not? If not, the moments of ideas and innovation are lost, whether it's in your life or in or for your business. It's a sadness when you think about it, certainly for yourself, but also for others, and even in a larger sense for the world. The fact is, an idea, even the best of ideas, are powerless if you let them stay inside of you, if you never pull the idea out so that others can reflect on it, think about it, even contend with it, just as you have to do. If this kind of push and pull of idea and in action has happened to you, I venture to say you're not alone. You know, the lost idea syndrome happens to a lot of people. And even though it's said that misery likes company, it really doesn't matter. Because once again, when that idea is lost, it is powerless. And you or the others around you have no chance to benefit of it. I think this particularly happens to people as they age, you know, in their lives, their marriages, their careers. They decide they want something perhaps different, but maybe important. They want to do something more to make their lives and their work richer. But then that sense of powerlessness overtakes them. They suppress the idea or let it go. They become small-voiced and they don't act at all. This happened to me at some point in my life, actually when I was a little over 50, and it was the time when my mom actually died. Perhaps it was her death, perhaps it was being truly plunk in middle age, or the combination, that I began wondering whether I'd been charting my own course. And what could I do so that I would grow and thrive even more? And after a great deal of thought about this, perhaps because I've been a journalist and a marketing writer all of my professional career, perhaps it was because in those professions I'd written a heck of a lot of stories. Perhaps it was because storytelling had always been part of my life, because stories were a part of my home growing up. There were the traditional ones, the fairy tales, Cinderella, of course, Snow White, the rest of them. But there were personal stories too. And a lot of them were told to me about my mom because they were stories about her life. And when I listened to them at that time as a little girl, I was fascinated by them. And as I thought about them again, when I was a grown woman, they began to take on even more meaning. There was my mom as a teenager and the oldest of 4 children, and a sister who was sick with cancer and finally succumbed to the disease. There was my mom as a 20-something, being the spokesperson for the family and having to head down from New Jersey to Villanova by train. My Uncle Tom was at Villanova, and he decided he wanted less religion and more big city life at NYU. And my mother had to be the family member who took him out of that school. Even further on into her 20s, she was the glue that held the family together. The same Uncle Tom, after graduate school, went into the 1st Counterintelligence Corps during World War II, and he was stationed behind enemy lines. And he wrote to the family frequently. And she was the one who received the letters and read them to her mom and her dad, and the one who wrote letters back saying that at home everything was all right and the family was safe too. But for all her responsibilities, my mother had a delightfully lighthearted, fun side. And I joyed when I was a kid at the stories she told of trying to live out her father's desire for her to become a nurse. She was enrolled in nursing school and had several unusual experiences. She had to sanitize tools one day and put them in the sanitizer incorrectly so that the door flipped open and hot water spilled out all over the utility room floor. There was the time she was assigned to take a body of a person who had just died down to the morgue, and that person had false teeth, which she had to put back in his mouth. And apparently she didn't do it right, because on the way down to the morgue in the elevator, they sort of snapped shut, and she practically jumped out of her skin. And finally, there was the time, and let's call it the last straw, when she fainted in the operating room. And the head nurse said to her father, "I'm so sorry, but I'm afraid Margaret isn't fit to be a nurse or for our nursing curriculum." And so she left graduate school, went to college, and became an executive secretary for a huge New Jersey firm, where she worked until she became engaged to my dad, and they married. Even then, as a little girl, I had the sense that my mom was really quite something. Those stories about her family showed me that she was a trooper and a doer, and the kind of woman who stood up not only to responsibilities, but to challenges. And she, as I said, was funny too. For example, the nursing stories, and even some stories of her school escapades. And above all, I had a sense that she told a good story, and quite frankly, she lived a good story. One that at every step on her journey gave her purpose and meaning. As I got older and was a married woman and mother myself, I watched as my mother created new stories. They really struck a nerve, maybe because I was in that time of my life when I had a lot of decision making to do too. One of the most notable things I saw my mom go through was the sudden death of my father. He was only 58 and she was 54. Then I was with her every step of the way when she was diagnosed with breast cancer at 72, and watched as she managed that disease. Her mastectomy itself, who else would have awakened from surgery, looked down at her chest and asked whether she still had cleavage, or the fact that she wanted nothing to do with reconstruction, so she had several prostheses, and she stored them and would carry them around to our house when she came overnight in a floral, beautiful hat box. The other thing that happened 2 years after my dad passed was that she returned to work at 56. Oh, she said, I have wonderful friends, but most of them are married. And I need something more for myself. So she went back to work, and it marked her late life rebirth of her career, a career that lasted until she retired at 83. Oh, even then, with the tragedies and the difficulties and the work and her diligence, she was still that lighthearted, wonderful woman. She had a radiant smile, a fabulous laugh. She loved people, and they loved her. And if she ever felt blue or disheartened, she was quick to pick up the phone and call a family member or a friend. And on many of those calls, she projected empathy for people who were having their own woes. As a matter of fact, there was a woman younger than my mother who was a neighbor, and that woman very suddenly lost her husband too. She suffered greatly from that death. She was bitter and depressed. And my mother, with her resilience, with her never asking, why did this happen to me, gave her neighbor encouragement. To this day, I will hear from my mother's friend who calls me and says, oh, how I miss your mom. I wish she were here so I could talk to her. Despite her emotional fearlessness, my mother did have a few hang-ups. Most notably was the one where she hated to drive on highways. Can you imagine that each time she approached the toll booth, she would toot her horn? I imagine to let either the toll collector or one of the workers manning the toll booths let them know that she was there. And she loved clothes. She was a real fashionista. She wore beautiful fabrics, beautiful colors, and she always looked so elegant with her silver, white, never dyed hair. Once again, I had the sense of story. It was my mom's story. And even now, as a grown woman, even now, as I think back to them, I really had to learn from those stories. I like to tell them because I hope and I think you might be able to learn something from them too, or have them bring forth a feeling of sameness, something that happened to you in your life, a person who made a difference. So maybe these stories can influence you. Would they show you perhaps that my mom understood that life had its share of curveballs, big ones? And they had been thrown at her sometimes, but she was no slouch. Despite all that, she was never a fickle finger of fate person who succumbed as a victim. She had power over her own life. And she was in control of her destiny and regrouped and evolved as necessary to transform and give meaning and purpose to her own life. Listen, think about it. Look what those curveballs did for my mother. The pain that comes from them enabled her, just as it can enable pain to help you achieve growth and become the best, most evolved version of yourself. Realize the time is precious and that you can't squander it. Do you want to cave or be a victim? Do you want to have courage and resilience so you stretch yourself? Yes, with discomfort, but with sheer guts, you keep on keeping on to turn things around. You may still have dreams, but again, you cannot realize them unless you act on them, unless you set goals and have a plan that will enable you to chart a course. There is much darkness. There is so much joy, and it's participation and ownership of your life that will bring you joy, to keep moving forward, to not get stuck in the mud, to not cave when things go wrong or when you make the wrong decision, but to figure out a way to make a wrong decision right. I recognize it takes intention to do that, to live your story. But I encourage you to do that, to find your stories and to live them. As a person who's been engaged in storytelling professionally for so long, I can help. And I would welcome you to write to me at chatwithbarb.com, and I can give you some tips for finding your stories, and also spend a little time on the phone with you and see if we can get you to ferret your stories out. The important thing is to be on the lookout for stories, to tweak your awareness for stories and to deepen it, because I believe that stories are everywhere. You know, keeping a journal helps, writing down your observations, and particularly how you feel about your observations or what happened to you on any given day. Ask yourself questions. Does this story trigger a creative spark? Is there humor? Is there sadness? Does it evoke a fond memory? Does it inspire new opportunities? Is there a lesson to be learned? Something you can share with someone else, a best friend, a stranger, someone who needs a helping hand at a particular point. If so, that story is not just yours, but it's more than you. If you share it with someone so that you can raise her awareness, laugh or cry with her, provide her and yourself with the opportunity to reach new heights. Here's the thing, the structure of story holds important truths, and you can become students of others people's story, and you can also become students of your own. But none of this will happen if you're not on the lookout for stories, if you don't find them and figure out their meaning and how there are lessons to be learned that you can share. Remember, if you have a great idea, if you have a story, and you don't pull it out of yourself, it will die with you. There is tremendous impact and much to be learned from the words that make up stories. I found this quote from British author Joanne Duarte, and she says, and I want to share it with you because I think the words are beautiful. Words have the potential to be the world's biggest Lego set, a set you can make anything out of, from a rocket ship that will take you to the stars, or a Ouija board that will raise the dead. You can build because you communicate. And this is what stories are all about. They're about communicating things, all sorts of things. You are made up of stories, lots of stories, and I guarantee they are all magic. They can inspire others and empower you. American author Nancy Duarte said, "The future isn't a place you're going to, it's a place you create." Ask yourself how you can live a story that inspires you or the people around you. that inspires you to speak out and show up with a purpose that will help others. Remember, stories are magic. Go out and make your magic. Find your stories, live them, and make meaning. And make a difference one story at a time. Thank you.